Hi, I'm Debra Birnbaum, Variety's Executive Editor of TV, and I'm here with Lance Black to talk about When We Rise.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for joining me.
Of course.
So congratulations on When We Rise.
Thank you so much. It's been quite a journey.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
So When We Rise has aired. Talk about the success of it. How are you feeling about it now that everyone has seen it?
Well, not everyone has seen it yet. But that's part of the success of it so far, has been watching the slow and steady build of viewership with it. And that does matter to me. I'm not going to lie. We had our live numbers come in, and I wanted more. And then to see how that's built over the past month as people find it on demand and DVR, which I guess is part of the revelation. Well, that's how we watch miniseries now. And now I think the latest numbers have over 30 million people have either watched it or started watching it. And, that might not be the biggest hit in television, but that's more than ever saw an LGBTQ history project in a movie theater ever, combined. Sure. Milk, Brokeback Mountain, Moonlight combined. And so that's inspiring to me. But I want to keep moving forward. The critical response was wonderful. The viewer response was unlike anything I've ever experienced on any project I've done, and I've been blessed. But it was really, it was clear how much the LGBTQ community was starving for their history, and the power that folks have already been able to draw from it. That's been palpable. And so, I'm happy, but I'm never satisfied, but that's my nature. And I don't think I'll be happy until more people have seen it, and that it's being used as curriculum in high schools to start to teach our history alongside our other social justice movement histories.
How are you going to accomplish that? Are you going to send it out to high schools?
So right now we have 3 organizations working to build curriculum and a syllabus around it. I always say go to the people who know how to do it best. So I'm very excited about working with the groups who already have those relationships in schools, have already made inroads when it comes to LGBTQ stories and history and support in high schools. And so ABC working with their partners like Listen to get it into schools. But you got to build a syllabus, and you got to make it into a curriculum. And the real goal is to have it in schools by October for LGBTQ History Month.
Let's talk about the project. I mean, I know we've spoken before, but why don't you start from the beginning? What were your goals? What did you set out to do when you created this project?
Well, when I first started it, I was really worried that we were losing sight of the power of we in social justice movements. And some of that was when I was walking up the steps of the Supreme Court with a Supreme Court case around marriage equality. I left filmmaking for 4 years to fight for marriage equality in this country. We were succeeding, many of us for the first time in this movement. We didn't know what to make of this success. And I started to be concerned that we were getting so drunk on that success that we were losing our connection, those valuable connections to other social justice movements. And it's those connections with racial minorities, with women who are being treated differently, with people who pray to a different God, with workers, with all of the folks who we had built these strong coalitions with before, dating all the way back to Harvey Milk. Where were they? And any social justice movement that becomes isolated becomes weak. And I think we'd all become a bit weak. And I worried we'd be defeated if we did. And we were. That's what happened. And so when I first started working on it, it was a warning. And now I think it's a roadmap to get back. It's a roadmap to say, and it's why these characters aren't all fighting just for LGBTQ equality. When you look at the series, when you meet these people in the beginning, they're working for the women's movement, the black civil rights movement, the peace movement. They end up giving back to help with immigration reform and healthcare reform. They understand the interconnectedness of the S's. And I hope this is a roadmap that says, hey, look at these true stories. Look how strong we were when we came together. Look how much progress we made when we fought for our neighbor as hard as we fought for ourselves, and how we made our lives better and joyful in the end. And so, I'm hoping people heed the lessons of these real life stories so we can start to push back against this backlash that we're living in right now.
What are some of those lessons? What are the messages that you wanted to send?
Well, number one, don't be myopic. I say this to my brothers in the LGBTQ movement. Harvey Milk built a coalition of the S's to get elected. That was not just LGBTQ people in that coalition. Yes, he had to bring together gays and lesbians who weren't even getting along at the time, but he also reached out to workers who weren't getting paid a fair enough wage to be able to put their talented children through school. He reached out to racial minorities in San Francisco who weren't having their votes counted properly. He reached out to seniors who couldn't afford to live in the city they'd grown up in and built. And by building that coalition, he got elected and started winning at the ballot box. We can do that again, folks. But we have to make sure when we're chanting gay, straight, black, white, same struggle, same fight, that we don't just say those words because they rhyme and sound good together, but that we actually show up for our brothers and sisters in other social justice movements. That's what When We Rise is about. That's why the we is the biggest word in it. That's what, for those who haven't seen the series yet, you're going to see yourself in some form in this series. It's not just LGBTQ history. Every single one of us on this planet are a minority in one way or another. It just depends on how you slice that pie. We all have an investment in different people being treated equally.
So for those who haven't seen the series, talk a little bit how you built it and how you shaped it around these key characters. Well, Cleve Jones, for example, I mean, you jokingly call him the Forrest Gump because he's at every place in history.
He is. He's Gay Zelig. He just appears everywhere. I mean, he worked really hard to stay in it. And that was I had like 3 things I really wanted. 4 years ago when I started working on this, I said, I would love for these whoever I portray, I want them to be lifelong activists. And that really narrowed it down because activist work is difficult. You're most often getting eaten by your own. Because social justice work, we're all moving through the dark. There's no right way. We don't know what the right path is yet. We're trying to find it. And so we disagree a lot. And that's tough. Mm-hmm. Most activists probably last like 3 or 6 years. I wanted folks who'd lasted a lifetime so I could tell a story that started in their teenage years and took us to today. I wanted, like I said, for them to come from other social justice movements. That also narrowed it down. And last but not least, I wanted to stop telling the story that if you dedicate your life to working for a cause or for making your neighbor's life better, that in the end you had to die. I've told that story. And I thought it's about time for us to say that people concerned with social justice can fight. They can fight for their own lives, for their families' lives, their neighbors' lives, and they can survive and thrive. And so I wanted them all to still be alive. And that really narrowed it down, mostly because there was a plague in the middle of it. And so I constructed it with those thoughts in mind. It took about a year to find a group of people who checked those boxes and actually knew each other and had built a little makeshift family in San Francisco in the early 70s who worked together up until now. And I was really lucky to have found that. They're one of the few, if not the only groups like that still exist. And so this is their story. It's not all of our story. It's not all of the LGBTQ story. I love that the only criticism I'm hearing from my community is more. That's when you did it right. When the critics are saying, is it too dense? Is there too much? And the audience is saying, no way, give us more. We want more. We can take this. We need it. We're starving for it. And it is useful. And our history is power. And so, it was that construction with these people that starts to lift up who we are as a people, but the work's not done with When We Rise.
How much did you have to add fiction to fact? How much of their story is true? Well,
I don't like to, that's a really good question. And it's one that I ask my students when I teach, based on a true story film, how far do you feel comfortable bending reality before it snaps? And there are some filmmakers who feel that they can bend it very far. I want these stories to be unassailable. I want them to be so authentic that they can't be easily dismissed. I'm interested with stories like this in creating a history we can stand on like a foundation, so I do not fictionalize very much. My fictionalization comes in, let's be honest, this is a 40-year story that you learn about in 6 hours if you take the commercials out. So telescoping timeline, combining characters, those are the 2 big things you have to do if you're going to get it to fit. And I had to do some of that. But at the end of the day, I feel like I can't bend to the truth too far without it snapping. And in this day and age, the way these things get attacked is by saying that this never happened. If you look online with the attacks we got on the trailer, it wasn't saying this is bad. It's saying this never happened. It's saying this is false. These things were never said by this extreme right group. And I thought that was insidiously clever, because the way you disempower people is you take away their history. And so the last thing I wanted was for anyone to say that this didn't happen. And I didn't make this alone. I worked with a group of writers and directors and filmmakers, and we worked closely with the real people all the way through post. And what's rare is to have all of the real people still standing beside the project the way they are, and standing behind it and promoting it and saying, yes, this is truthful.
This week's episode is brought to you by Emmy-nominated comedy series Blackish. It just wrapped another critically hailed and hilarious season with creator and executive producer Kenya Barris tackling the recent presidential election, the birth of a new child, and the send-off of another to college. Blackish stars Emmy nominees Anthony Anderson and Tracee Ellis Ross for your Emmy consideration in all categories, including Outstanding Comedy Series. As The Atlantic says, it's not just TV, it's art. You also got a fantastic cast. Talk about how you got these amazing actors to sign on for this project.
I'm fortunate that I'm in the pigeonhole I'm in, and it means I'm doing work that attempts to move the needle, and it's not every day that a network is as brave as ABC has been, and such a strong partner on this, to support this project, to say we're going to air it, and I think when we submitted it to my Dreamcast, they saw two things. They're like, this is trying to move the needle. This is trying to shine light on an issue. And the fact that ABC is behind it the way they are and wants to put it out there for the world to see, not just to preach to the choir, but for the world to see, well, that's moving, and we might actually move the needle a little bit. And it's not every day you get that opportunity in Hollywood, let's be honest. And so my dream for Roma Guy was Mary Louise Parker. From pretty early on, she has the humor that you find in the real Roma, but she'll also cut you down if you start to lie. And so that was the first ask. And I'll never forget driving home in London late at night, and I got the call that she had said yes. And that's the first moment I dared to believe we'd actually pull off this mad venture of bringing LGBTQ history to ABC. And then it snowballed from there. And I, after completing writing, I really wanted Guy Pearce. And we called and called and called. And it was only after Rachel Griffiths came in to meet about playing Dionne Jones that she said, have you considered Guy Pearce for this role? And I said, boy, have we ever. We want him to do this so badly. And I'll never know if it did any good, but she said she was going to call him, and within a week he called and said yes, and it built from there. A very emotional phone call from Michael K. Williams in the airport in San Francisco when I was scouting, who said, I lost my family of friends in New York during this plague. This is very personal to me, and I don't think he ever said, can I play this? He's like, so when I show up on set to play this, ... He owned it. So, and not to discount the incredibly talented group of young people who play Roma and Cleve and Dionne and Ken in the early years, and most of them from theater and some brand new. And I hope those faces get some attention, because they worked incredibly hard, just like the older cast, with the real people, doing their own research to make sure that this was, again, as authentic and unassailable as possible. And it's been wonderful that we have been touted as having been so honest, and that's not easy in a community as diverse as our community. But it's a real compliment from my own folks in my own community that they found it so honest and true. And a lot of that credit has to go to those actors who pulled it off.
You mentioned the younger actors. How did you go about, given the time span? It was important, that you find younger actors and older actors to play the same part. How did you go about matching them so that their performances would match, or did you not? Or you were not concerned about it?
Well, two things. That's interesting because it's they worked closely with the real people, and I said to them, do that work. Understand that these people changed massively in the 10-year leap. So if I hear here and there a criticism that they don't match, I'm like, that's because in that 10 years we leap, they survived a plague and they changed and they looked very different. But if you compare them to the photographs and the film and the video, they all did a masterful job. Sadly, you're not going to recognize the young Ken and the older Ken after 10 years of suffering through AIDS with no treatment. He did not look the same. Mm-hmm. He did not carry himself the same. Neither did Cleve. Neither did Dion, who was trying to keep these men alive in a hospital in San Francisco. So it wasn't matching each other in terms of actors. It was matching the truth. It was matching who were these people before the plague hit and who were they after. And so we used the real folks as our guiding light, and thankfully they were willing to come up and to participate with the actors and the costumers and designers and the writers.
And of course, they went through huge life changes.
They went through huge life changes. Three of these main characters, Ken Jones, Cleve Jones, Cecilia Chung, were HIV positive early on. And most of their friends did not survive. And they were close to death many times. And that takes a toll, losing your family of friends. And that was their only family, because many of these young people lost their families when they came out or were outed. And then to have your family ripped away again by a plague, that changes a person. And the drugs were not easy to survive either. And that changed who these people were.
Why did you decide on the narrative structure of having Guy Pearce narrate the story as told, as if he was being interviewed by a journalist?
Well, it is one of, so he narrates the first 2 hours, and then I hand it off to Roma to narrate the next hour, to Ken to narrate the next hour, and eventually the straight daughter of two lesbian parents narrates an hour. But you do come back to, like a frame, to Cleve, again with this young journalist kid. And honestly, it's, I don't name him, but in 2006, or 2005, 2006, I heard Cleve Jones was still alive in Palm Springs. And I was supposed to go out there to help write the book for a rock opera about the AIDS quilt. And I went out with a friend who wanted to write it, but every time that friend left the room and left Cleve and I alone, I looked at Cleve and I said, "Tell me about Harvey Milk." And eventually Cleve was like, "Yeah, let's not do this rock opera about the quilt. You're interested in a guy no one knows anymore. No one asks me about him anymore." And he pulled out this box and he started going through it. And the more questions I asked, the more he could tell I was actually curious. And he hadn't met a generation of young people who were curious about our history. And I think it was inspiring to him. But the way he dealt with that was by lighting up a bunch of cigarettes and looking me in the eye and saying, "What's it like to be a part of the first generation in this country with no purpose? Man. And what are you going to do about it?" And so I answered that call by writing Milk, and I answered that call by going to the U.S. Supreme Court to fight for marriage equality. And that's how I got to know our history, and that's what I'm sharing with the world now. I don't name myself, but yeah.
So you're the kid in the room.
The people really paying attention are like, so the guy who did all of Lance's stories as a Mormon in Big Love is now playing the same person in this show. That he might be trying to tell us something. And that's Doug Smith. So he comes in and does that. But it's really, I also want to be honest that this is my perspective on these lives. And there are probably others' perspectives on these lives.
Is there something you learned from this process?
I mean, there are 1,000 things I've learned from this process. I would say I learned about myself as a human being, myself in the work that I do, a lot of that from Roma and Dion, who refuse to use the word I when talking about their work, which is very difficult when you're trying to research a script, because you need the I. You need it, like, literally, did you go to lunch or did we go to lunch? Like, who went to lunch? Who ordered what? You just kind of need to know what they did. And it's very we. And as I got frustrated, they explained to me their frustration with too many gay men and men in general using the word I, and how that's not helpful and not useful, and how that could help make us lose our power. And she was right. You saw that in an election recently. And so I learned a lot about the word we, and it's why the name stayed what it is, and it's why I told the designers, make that the biggest word in this series. But I relearned lessons that I've learned before. This is hard work telling these stories, and it's hard work getting an audience to it. It doesn't happen overnight. It didn't with Milk. It didn't with our Supreme Court case. And it didn't with this, but if you are persistent and you keep at it and you're honest, and it was work that will do good, it finds its audience. And I'm so thrilled this show has started to find its audience in a big way.
Well, I guess you sort of answered my next question. I was going to say, what was the biggest challenge you faced making this?
Well, the big challenge is threading a needle, which is, I would not have made this for anyone but ABC. Knowing full well that if I'd gone to some of my old partners, who I love and adore, they would have had more money to spend. There would have been more time to shoot it. But I felt like we would be preaching directly to the choir. And I didn't want to do that again. But that means, I have to learn about how to write around commercials. There are certain broadcast standards you have to meet. Which, by the way, ABC went to bat for me to push those and to make sure we could say things that needed to be said to make it authentic. And there are the challenges just of making network TV today. There's not unlimited time and there's not unlimited money. There's just not. And that presents challenges. But we rose to the occasion, and ABC was there to help me along the way. And we had a cast and a crew that no one was doing it for the money, let me tell you that. And there's something about no one doing it for the money that means you all work a little harder, which is always interesting to me. And in the end, I look at it and I know where I've had to compromise to get it done on ABC. But then when you get the phone call from GLSEN, which advocates for young people, young LGBTQ people in school to be safe, and they say, listen, because this was on ABC, it's past broadcast standards. It's ready for any audience. We can put this in schools. It all feels worth it. I'll get tearful. But it's like, then I realize, because we survived those challenges, it has a bigger life, and it will have a bigger reach, and that it can last, and that young people out there, and not just LGBTQ young people, but all young people who might feel a little different, which, let's be real, that's all of us at a young age, will see that we've had forefathers and foremothers that go back generations that have fought very hard for us. And I think that gives people hope and inspiration. And hopefully that'll help a new generation rise up a little stronger and to try to fight for good for themselves, their family, and their neighbors.
Anything you would have done differently?
Well, yes. I mean, I wrote and then in the end directed some of these, and yes, every time I never like anything I do. Can we be honest for two? Like,
who does?
No, it's not. It's I've watched Milk twice, and both times I put my hands over my face and go, "Oh gosh, if we just had more time that day, or if I knew that was going to happen, we would have reacted this way." And and it's always that's being a good filmmaker. Whenever I meet a filmmaker who says, "No, it was great, it was perfect," I'm like, You're either lying to yourself or to me right now. So yeah, there's a lot of things I would do differently, but that's film. I mean, at least in film you get a take two. I grew up in theater; you don't even get that. So, yeah. But I wouldn't change any of the major decisions that we made about who to depict and where to put the show.
Anything you left on the cutting room floor you'd like to get back?
Yes, can we please do? I'm gonna look at my ABC lovely folks and say, let's do a director's cut one day. Yeah, there's a lot of scenes that had to be left on the cutting room floor, and stories and characters that had to be left on the cutting room floor that would have created more representation of more people of diversity in our movement. And I keep saying to folks, like, we'll tell those stories one day. We'll get back to that. But it's network TV. You can't go over time. Mm-hmm. You have to trim it down. And so some of that was left.
I read in an interview where you said you thought the president might like the show. Do you think so? Still think so?
I don't think he's seen it.
I don't think he's seen it.
I don't think he would be doing the things he's doing if he'd seen it. And that's unfortunate. Like, he's clearly takes the time to watch the news, to check in on how he's doing. But how about the fact that you're the president of the United States, sir, and you represent all of us? So when we put out onto a major network the story of a good portion of your population's lives, could you please tune in, sir? And you might understand why it is we're so upset at some of the things you're doing and how you're rolling back some of our protections. And so I urge him to watch it. You might learn something.
And on that note, it's been a pleasure speaking with you.
All right, thank you very much for having me.
Thanks so much.